Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. I have a sleeping child, so I'm trying to do this quietly. But while you're awaiting the next season of the No-Till Market Garden podcast with our new hosts, I wanted to introduce you to a brand new show. It is called the Seed Growers Podcast with host, the great Dan Brisebois. This is a podcast dedicated to seed production in the market garden context, which I know many of you will have interest. So we wanted to share the first episode for you on this feed for you to check it out. If you enjoy it, which I know you will, subscribe to the Seed Growers Podcast wherever you are hearing this right now. All right, with that, here is the first episode of the Seed Growers Podcast with Dan Brisebois.
We think and center our lives around these seeds that create our livelihoods. It's hard to separate the importance of that and not feel like I want to be contributing to that. I just feel like I keep being drawn to this the locus of it, and for me, that locus is the seed.
Welcome to the first episode of the Seed Growers Podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, a seed grower at Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm, and I'm also really into spreadsheets and crop planning. With the Seed Growers Podcast, I want you to get inspired to go out and save some seed on your farm. Adrianna and Joelene of Empowered Flowers are my first guests on the Seed Growers Podcast. They grow certified organic vegetables in Oregon City, which they sell at farmers markets and the Winter CSA. They also grow a range of seeds on seed contracts for seed companies. Adrianna and Joelene explain how they make seeds work amidst their vegetable crops. They talk about how they got started as a contract seed grower and why they like this way of selling seeds. In each episode, I also want to make sure you get some technical seed saving information. So, Adrianna and Joelene talk about how they grow, extract, and dry a quarter acre of cucumbers to harvest 120 pounds of cucumber seed. We wrap up by talking about how Adrianna and Joelene protect seeds drying in the greenhouse from the mouse people. This episode is sponsored by the Organic Seed Alliance. Organic Seed Alliance is a US-based nonprofit that advances ethical seed solutions to meet food and farming needs in a changing world. OSA's work ensures an abundant and diverse supply of ecologically grown seed tended in perpetuity by skilled and diverse communities of seed stewards. To advance this mission, we serve growers working with seed at any scale through participatory research, practical education, policy advocacy, and network development. Join our online seed community at organicseedcommons.org, search our resources at seedalliance.org, and read recommendations for advancing organic seed at stateoforganicseed.org. On a personal note, I also want to mention the Organic Seed Conference that OSA puts on every 2 years. I first went in 2008, and I learned so much about growing seed and the business of seed during the conference, and met so many seed growers, breeders, and seed companies. It was the single most influential and formative experience in my seed growing career. If you're serious about seed, you should give it a try. This episode is also sponsored by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. Seedheads is the cross-pollinating podcast where Canadian seed heroes tell their stories, share their how-to tips, and talk about the seeds they love. Join Steph Benoit and Hugo Martorell as they host conversations that are both technically useful and personally inspiring, as guests share the myriad ways that seeds are at the center of our lives as growers and eaters. If you're interested in hearing from people who are passionate about saving, stewarding, and sharing seed, subscribe to Seedheads in your favorite podcast app, or go to seedsecurity.ca/podcast and get started with seasons 1 and 2 of Seedheads today. Seedheads is a podcast inspired by Canadian seed growers and hosted by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, a program of seed change. Season 3 is coming in 2022, as always with episodes in French and English. I'm subscribed to the Seedhead podcast, and I can't wait to listen to Season 3. Here's the first episode of the Seed Growers Podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Adrianna and Joelene. Welcome to the Seed Grower Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you. I watched your presentation at the Organic Seed Alliance conference about integrating vegetable seed production with market garden, and I thought this would be a perfect conversation for this podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot to explore here, I feel like.
So your season has already begun at this point of planting things in the ground for this year?
Yeah, that's right. Right now, it's March 11th, and our greenhouses are planted. So we've transplanted some stuff out and direct seeded. So we're getting going. We're a little behind this year, but everything's always changing, and this season is no different.
That sounds exciting. So to start off, would you want to tell me how you got into farming?
Sure, I can go first. I started farming on the East Coast about 13 years ago. And my first farm job was working on a CSA vegetable farm at college, where I was not attending, but I lived in the town. So I went to college at UMass Amherst, and at Hampshire College, they had a CSA program, and there they grow also food for the dining commons that are there. And so it was now I'm struggling to really remember, but I want to say it was like 250 shares, as well as wholesale account to the actual college dining commons. That job started in May and then went through December. So it was a much shorter season than what I'm experiencing now, being on the West Coast, where we're really lucky and we can grow fresh food and harvest fresh food year round pretty much.
What brought you to actually choose to work on a CSA farm while you were in college?
So my lived experience is as an immigrant. I migrated to the States when I was 7, and a lot of emphasis was put on going to college and having a different, I would say, more economically advanced life than what we were living. And so when I got into farming, I just sort of did it as an off thing. I had just read Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma, and it really motivated me to get involved with food production. And so I just did it as an off thing, thinking like, oh, this will be fun and an interesting experience. And I'd never really been outside. I'd never had a garden. I had never cultured any sort of like outside living. And it was such a different experience to spend time outside, to experience the natural world, to like be connected to the weather, to nurture all of these plants and feed all of these people and create this community around this thing that we were growing. And I'd never had an experience like that. And then everything sort of shifted for me. And I went from studying economics and being on this track of internet. I don't know what I was headed for before because it seems so far away, but just everything pointed me back to farming, and then there was no turning back for me.
How about you, Joelene? What brought you into farming?
Well, I had a completely different upbringing because I grew up in Oregon. I had a big family. We were into mushroom hunting, and my dad had a big garden. I sort of more fell into it naturally because I really loved being outside and eating fresh vegetables. And then I was in botany, a botany major, and then just decided I didn't want to do that technical route. I wanted to be free and be outside. I don't know. I just had a lot of energy, and I just really loved plants and growing things and providing food for people. And it just fit my energy level. It's very different. It's not like working a job where you go in and, it's just, there's no parameters to it. There's always learning, and it just constantly expanding and changing and dealing with different issues. And so it's exciting and interesting constantly. It's definitely not ever stagnant.
So you both started farming on different coasts and farmed for a while doing different things, and at one point your paths crossed?
Yeah. I actually came to the West Coast to work on a seed farm. I had been farming for Hampshire College and growing for the CSA there for 2 years. And then I farmed in New York at the Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture. And I just kept as I was planting the seeds, I kept just being like, these seeds, some of them are organic, some of them are not. Some of them come from a little tiny company. Some of them come from really big companies. There's a big economic element to seeds on farms. And I felt like there's a limit to growth for organics, and it starts with the seed. And when I was at Stone Barns, I actually was really lucky, and I met Frank Morton of Wild Garden Seed there. He was doing a lecture series, and he sort of walked in, and he has his like wild gray hair, and he was wearing tie-dye, and I was just like, this person, who is this person? So I asked him for a job, and he needed someone on his crew, and he was like, you have to come to the West Coast. It's not like, yeah, you can come, but you have to move to Oregon. And so I did. And that's how we met. Joelene was working on the farm where Wild Garden Seed was leasing part of their property. And that's how I made it to the West Coast. That's how we met. And that's how our version of farming, market gardening, and seed growing was sort of
merged.
It's a function of the both of us being together.
And now you've been running your own farm for a couple of years, Empowered Flowers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met 10 years ago, and then we've been farming on our own for 3 years.
That's always a big jump. So do you want to tell me about what your farm looks like? You can tell me about the layout, the infrastructure, maybe how big your farm team is.
Our farm team right now, it consists of Adrianna and I and somebody who works with us part-time. We like having 3 full-time people with us, like us and one other person seems like kind of the golden number for us to be able to accomplish everything. Because we work about 3 to 4 acres, I think. We have aspirations of being a little bit larger and growing more diversity. We're trying to create infrastructure right now. Since we've just moved, we put up a propagation greenhouse. We have 2 farms kind of.
Yeah. So when we started Empowered Flowers, we were farming on a little over an acre in Oregon City. And that fall, we got a new lease that allowed us to expand. And then we went from 1.5 acres to 3 acres. And then last year we grew close to 4, including the seed crops that we grow. So we grow vegetables for market. We have a Winter CSA, a small Winter CSA, I want to say. It's 20 people, and we do seed contracts. So those are our main avenues for income. We have not that many houses. We have 2 greenhouses, and then some really low tunnels, the sort of like bent top rail hoops that you have, or that you can bend yourself. I think some people call them caterpillars. But yeah, it's a pretty small and tight operation that allows us to really do all of the work ourselves. So that's cuts both ways. It's really beneficial to be in touch with all parts of our business. And it's also can sometimes feel really overwhelming to do all parts of our business. Our passion is for growing, but the other elements of our business are also really important so that we can grow.
We have a passion for a lot of things. We like we want to, Adrianna's she has a history of, herbalism. We want to grow, medicinals, and we want to have an orchard and have fruit, and we want to have more of a well-rounded, not just a vegetable farm, but have fruit and different things, which we don't have yet, but we aspire to.
So you're building a full farm system.
Yeah, that's what we'd like to. Now that we're someplace more stable, we can actually go towards that way.
So before we jump into seed production, do you want to talk a bit about what your vegetable sales and production are like a little bit more? So you've mentioned already that you're selling at farmers markets. Is that just during the summer or year round, and also doing Winter CSA?
Yeah, we do a year-round market. It's at a food co-op here in Portland, which is just 25 minutes away from our house. And that's a smaller market. like I said, we do that 1 year round. And then in the summertime from June through November, we do a second market, which is slightly bigger, more income for us. And that's sort of more of the high season fruiting crops. Our CSA is a winter CSA, so it starts in November and it ends next week, the end of March. And that's 20 households also in the Southeast Portland area. They're market regulars. We're not really like marketing and trying to expand our CSA. It was just a way for us that we wanted to sort of bring our regular customers in closer. So we decided to go with that.
So what acreage, like of your total acreage, what amount is actually in vegetable production versus in seed production?
We did that math for the seed conference, actually, as I was trying to figure out how we integrated. It's always changing. But last year, the way it went was we did 3 acres of vegetables and almost a full acre of seed crops on contract. The amount of seed that we grow is dependent on the number of contracts that we can actually get. And the number of seed contracts that we can actually do is related to the crops that seed companies are looking for. So we can't, they can be sort of more mutually exclusive to each other, in the sense that if I'm growing zucchini for market, I can't grow zucchini for a seed crop, because they would cross with each other and I wouldn't have a good seed production unless we have an isolation, which was one of the benefits to the way our business was 2 years ago, where we had 3 different locations. And so we had a lot of isolations. We could do more diverse crops, whereas now we're sort of consolidating where we are, which is really beneficial to our lifestyle. We're only going to one place, and our cleaning shed and our wash and pack out, our cooler, our greenhouse, it's all in one place. That makes our life really easy, but it has changed the variety of seed crops that we can produce.
So what you're saying is, if you're growing something that's a cross-pollinator for your market crop, it might be pretty tricky to also grow it on a seed contract. So do market garden crops lead the way in crop planning before you take on seed contracts?
Yes.
There's a lot of different things we can grow, though.
Mm-hmm.
Different varieties. I mean, we can grow flowers, and we just might not be able to grow things that cross with zucchini, like delicata or something like that. It's more difficult, but
yeah. So some things can be really like exclusive or exclusionary to our market garden, and other things are beneficial. So for example, this year we're doing more flower seed contracts, and there's a big learning curve there because I haven't cleaned too much flower seed.
the seed's really tiny.
And the seed's really small.
Usually.
But the benefit of that is it's not competing with our market garden crops. And so we're sort of shifting a little bit this year to try a different set of seed crops to see how that fits with our market growing. But market growing is sort of the bread and butter of our business. And seed contract growing is an important element that we feel like mission driven and passionate about pursuing.
That definitely, I totally understand what you're saying. So the market garden is the foundation kind of economically of the business, and maybe that's what pays the bills at the base level. And then the seed growing is a secondary part of the business, but maybe more important for a longer term vision of, I don't know about the farm, but maybe the world. Is that maybe one way to put it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's how I feel. I don't know.
And diversity. I mean, diversity on farms is really important. Having income diversity and having seed crops brings lots of different, because you're getting flowering plants, so you're bringing a lot of different kind of pollinators onto your property, and diversity is always good. And seed crops just kind of fit that diversity slot.
So once you got into seeds, it seems like you've had a hard time shaking them. They've been ingrained into your psyche now, and it's part of the way you're farming.
Very true. I just really feel like we as farmers, every year we look through the seed catalogs, we get excited about seeds. We have to make a decision of if we want to be growing hybrids or open pollinated plants. We think and center our lives around these seeds that create our livelihoods. It's hard to separate the importance of that and not feel like I want to be contributing to that. Specifically, we're certified organic, and certified organic seed is bred in organic systems, performs better in organic systems. And I do really want to be a part of supporting farmers and supporting seed companies that support farmers. Like it feels like it starts with the seed and then just comes out from there. And I just feel like I keep being drawn to this the locus of it. And for me, that locus is the seed. So
Joelene, do you share the same passion for seed as Adrianna does?
I mean, yeah, I have a really high respect for seed because seed is pretty much everything. And I don't think most people realize, or this is my opinion, but like how seed shapes, like they shape everything that we eat. The seed availability shapes what you buy in the grocery store. It's pretty much a huge foundation of human existence that kind of blows my mind. And so I have like a lot of respect for seed and its intricacies, and the whole industry is really, it's really powerful. I'm more into like aesthetics. I love the beauty of it and the flowers and
You love the fields of flowering not flowering vegetables,
yeah.
flowering crops full of pollinators.
Yeah, I like the aesthetics of it. Yeah.
So seed production and vegetable production do have some similarities, for sure, but they also have a lot of differences, and a lot of crops are in the ground for different periods of time. Sometimes there's challenges with cross-pollination. So how do you make seed production fit into a market garden?
Planning. It's like a puzzle. You have to put it all together and figure out what's going to grow where the best and what's going to cross-pollinate and what things you have to separate. And it's things you overhead water and other things that you drip. Yeah, it's a big puzzle. It's nice to have enough property to fit it all together.
Do you have seed crops and vegetable crops in the same blocks or same areas of the field?
yes, we have 3 main growing areas. And at this point, right now, those 3 growing areas are all on one property. So there's not really a great way to isolate from each other. In previous years, where we had 3 different locations, it was pretty easy, and they weren't necessarily competing with each other for space. We grew bigger seed crops then because we could isolate them more easily, and we could dedicate an entire location to one seed crop. Now everything just grows alongside each other, which is why we have had to change and sort of shift our seed contracts to match so that our market gardens can exist in conjunction with the seed production element of Empowered Flowers.
Do you have to put a lot of thought into crop rotation with these different crops? Like, are you lumping all the same crops of the same families together in your fields and managing them that way and then rotating them that way? Or do you have a different way that you manage crops in your field?
Joelene is the planner, so I'll let her take
It's a little chaotic. But yeah, we do crop rotations. We're such small scale that we might do like a bed of this and a bed of that. So crop rotation is
bed specific.
Yeah, like bed specific. We don't like, we have multiple plantings of like different things. Like we'll have 5 or 6 different plantings of like brassicas, and we might have a block of one planting, but then in another field might be the second planting of that type of thing. It's colorful and things are mixed up and around and about, and we keep track of where we've had things, we map everything out and do rotations. And then, you know, having cover cropping and letting some land just fallow for a little while is somewhere where we've gotten to that point where we actually have some extra property, so we can rotate a lot better now.
But you're like an organizational wizard, yes?
Me?
I feel a little embarrassed to say we do rotations, but they're bed specific. So, you know, each bed has its own rotation, and some of them will turn into blocks for bigger plantings. But
I think it mimics nature more than the way that humans like to live, because nature isn't blocky, you know?
So then you'll have a bed of like I'm trying to think of a crop. Like would you have a bed then of a fresh market vegetable that might be harvested as a green or as a root, and it's beside a flowering seed crop side by side?
mm-hmm.
So what are the challenges of managing crops that way?
Well, we do try and put crops that are like more longer term crops. We try and put them more together. And then we have our more rotating crops like our salad mix and our lettuce and stuff like that are on areas where we kind of rotate through them a little bit quicker. And pretty much we don't have a large tractor. We just have a BCS. And so it's easy to do just individual bed prep. It's not difficult
to do bed specific sort of turning over, even if we'll have a block right next to it. Like, for example, I'll say right now, we have our garlic patch, which is a block right next to a seed growing block. And the seed growing block was planted in July.
Mm-hmm.
And the garlic was planted in November.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was that in and of itself is sort of like an overwintering block, even though they're different families and they're different sort of outcomes, different timelines. But that has allowed us to cover crop, you know, the next quarter acre of that field. Does that make sense? And then that patch that's sort of next to the seed crop and the garlic that we've cover cropped is what we're moving our market garden into in the spring, because we've had it cover cropped. So right now we're tarping it and we're sort of like bringing that all out into market production.
So you're managing overall a lot by maybe planting dates and then how long something's in the field and grouping things together that way, as opposed to grouping things specifically because they're seed or because they're this family. It has a lot to do with your management system rather than the botany of the crop.
Yeah, and cover cropping, the cover crop in the spring makes a big difference, where we put things that are more heavily cover cropped, we tend to get into that field a little bit later. And then areas where we pulled out a winter crop or something like that, we might be able to get into that a little bit earlier with just like a salad mix type of thing or lettuce.
And how does the seasonal workflow of seed production fit with the seasonal workflow of vegetable production?
You're good at that.
I think that the seasonal workflow of seed production and market gardening, they can be really complementary, and they are also very enmeshed, entwined, and peaking at the same time in September. September is the craziest time. And I know that market gardeners are like, September is crazy. But if you have a market garden and you're growing seeds, it's really crazy because you're trying to get to market and there's a lot of like time crunch there, but also you're trying to harvest your seed crops. And where we are in Western Oregon, where the rains sort of can start in September, you're always watching the weather. You want to get your seed as mature as you can possibly get it. But if the weather is turning, you need to get that crop in. And if you don't, then you would have sprouting, or you would have lower quality seed, or you would lose your seed crop. And because we grow on contract, the idea of growing of losing a seed contract or not capitalizing on the investment that we've made all year long would be a really big loss. But then as sort of the season wanes a little bit, October, November, we're still drying seed, we're cleaning seed, as the harvest like get a little bit easier, as we're putting stuff in storage and sort of like taking stuff out. Yeah, the seed cleaning, the seed drying, the seed packaging, the seed testing, like all of those things are happening at that time.
I don't do the whole deciding what we grow as much as Adrianna does, but she decides what we grow for seed based on its time commitment at certain times of year, because the vegetables, I don't know how you describe that, but
so there's overwintering seed crops that you would harvest the following sort of summer, July mostly, like June, July. And then there's like the spring seeded crops that you would harvest in the fall. And that doesn't really include biennials. Biennials sort of fall into this other category. But I think of seed production as there being two big pushes for seed production. There's the summer stuff, and then there's the fall stuff. So we don't do a lot of summer seed contracts because I know that in the summertime, we're still planting so much, weeding so much, harvesting so much that I know I'm not going to have the time and dedication that I need to be harvesting that seed, getting it out of the sun. There's a different weather pressure about having summer seed crops because you can't leave something outside. You can't leave something in a greenhouse to dry in July the way that you can in September or October. And so the weather pressure is kind of different and the timeline of it is different. Specifically, summer crops don't work very well with market gardening, I would say, but the fall stuff kind of does more. You have space we have space in the greenhouse to store stuff and hold stuff till we're ready to deal with it. We have more space to deal with stuff than we do in the summertime. So that's one of the ways in which, I don't take a lot of summer seed crops, but we do a lot of fall.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. The goal of no-till growers is to help produce and create valuable niche content like what you're listening to now. We create several different podcasts, from the Winter Growers podcast hosted by Clara Coleman to the Collaborative Farming podcast with host Jackson Roulette and many more. We produce videos at the No-Till Growers YouTube channel, including farm tours and crop-specific breakdowns. And our entire model is to create helpful, valuable farming content that is free and open to the public, so anyone, anywhere can use it. So if you appreciate that and our work, or are simply enjoying this show, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers. There are also other support options at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can even purchase a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, because when you purchase it directly from no-tillgrowers.com, specifically, the proceeds go to making you more amazing content like this. Okay, that's my spiel. Thanks, you all. Back to the show.
So what it sounds like is you got different limiting factors. You have your market garden, which is creating certain restraints to what crops you can choose so they don't cross-pollinate. And then you also have, for your seasonal workflow, you're trying to avoid the summer period. So then you have a target for the fall. What are crops that work really well in those windows?
Lettuce is a really big one for us. What's great about lettuce is it's selfing, so you don't need that much space between it and another lettuce seed crop that you're doing. And it's usually ready in September is when we do most of our lettuce seed harvest. I feel like that is sort of the prime example, right? Because our salad plantings for our market garden, we don't let go to seed. So they're not really competing. We're turning those beds over quickly enough because it's salad production areas. They're not competing with each other for pollination. And then they're ready in September, which is a much easier time for me to deal with seeds. So that I think is like a pretty prime example of it. In terms of like summer crops that we produce, we have produced onions, which are usually ready in like July and August for seed harvest, and overwintering brassicas. Those are like the two bigger sort of summer crops that we've done. What's good and bad about them is like they can be really easy to thresh and sort of put in containers and then dealt with a little bit later. And the amount of time that they can be in storage or that I can sort of put off the final cleaning for them has to do more with my contract. When do I have to turn in that seed is also a really important element of things that we produce in the summer.
So you mentioned that you're moving towards more flowers also as part of your crop mix, of your seed crop mix, because they have less chance of cross-pollinating with your vegetable crops.
Yeah, so the flower, expanding the flower seed that we're producing, this is going to be the first year that we're really doing that. And we had some experience. We had a flower seed growing contract last year and felt it went really well. It felt like I didn't have to think about the rotational element. It wasn't competing with my market crops. It wasn't, it was ready in the fall. It provided habitat and ecosystems for pollinators. It just seemed like it was just like win, 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 and a lot of pressure sort of off of the market gardening aspect of it. And that's part of why we're expanding it a little bit more.
And it's interesting.
Right? Exactly. to be sort of learning new seeds, how to clean new seeds.
And so easy to clean.
Well, we have a Winnow Wizard now, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is an important element of having a market garden alongside, or an important topic to sort of cover about having a market garden alongside a seed growing business is they're completely different infrastructures. There's some infrastructure that overlaps. For example, a greenhouse that's really useful for propagation in the spring and summer is where we dry our crops in the fall. And so, that piece of infrastructure works great for both of those production elements of our farm. But then, for cleaning seed, you don't need a Winnow Wizard, but we have a Winnow Wizard. That was a big infrastructure investment for us and was also really important for us to have in terms of workflow, with September being the way that I described it earlier, where it's just a crazy rush of time and energy into all elements of our business. Having the Winnow Wizard really allowed me to partially clean seed lots and put them away until I could really put in more energy into dealing with them.
Before I'm going to cut you off and ask, do you want to describe what the Winnow Wizard is for people listening who have never heard about the Winnow Wizard, which has a fantastic name?
It is.
Yeah. The Winnow Wizard is an amazing invention by an amazing colleague of ours. His name is Mark Lutera. And it is you can really find clean seeds on it. It has a hopper on top that you pour seed into, and it has an agitator in that hopper that allows the seed to drop into a vibrating shelf that then pours it out in front of a I don't know how many horsepower fan it is, but in front of a blower basically that separates the chaff from the seed by density. So winnowing is this basic, I would say, or fundamental foundational element of seed cleaning, where you're using, traditionally you'd be using the wind outside, but you can use fans to separate chaff from seed based on density. The Winnow Wizard has more mechanical elements that mimic the same thing. What's great about it is how much the wind is blowing. When I started growing seed, we had this really great area right by a river that we would go to in the afternoons when the wind would pick up. So we would do sort of field work in the morning and afternoon, and then we would always end the day at this field where we would clean seed. It was great. It had great steady wind, and we could clean a lot of seed that way. But if the wind was too windy or not windy enough, or the conditions were changing, it changed our ability to winnow. And so the way that the Winnow Wizard is helpful for us in terms of workflow is we don't have to be waiting on the wind. We have it in our garage that's pointed out. We can do it when it's raining outside. We can do it in the mornings.
And you can control the airflow. You can increase the airflow or decrease the airflow or break it up. Or depending on the weight of the seed.
And do you run most of your crops through the Winnow Wizard?
Yes. So Mark Lutera, who invented the Winnow Wizard, he and I worked at Wild Garden Seed. And so for the first year and a half of our seed growing contracts, he had Winnow Wizards, and Frank is still a beloved and dear mentor of mine. And so I would go there and use the Winnow Wizard to clean seeds, and Mark sort of like showed me all of these elements about it. I had gotten a lot of sort of screening training from Frank and cleaning seed for him and Wild Garden Seed for the 4 years that I worked there. So basically in those first year and a half, I was taking it up there and I was like, I really need a Winnow Wizard because you really can run every seed type through here. You can run flower seed through there as much as you can cucumber seed, squash seed, and like onion seed. It really, because it's based on density, it's not like screens. It will always work for all seed crops because all seed crops can be separated by density. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And it's a great description.
It's the final clean. We do screening. We initially screen things and then the final clean is through the Winnow Wizard. Not always.
Jolene's like, isn't that how you do it? I'm the one who cleans the seed. It's alternating sort of between winnowing and screening. Because in screening, the screening process allows you to sort of sort by seed size. So you're separating a larger seed size from a smaller seed size. And then the Winnow Wizard, you're separating by density. In doing both of those elements, like one after the other, following each other, you're able to separate sort of the highest density and the largest seed from the smallest seed. So for example, seed that comes sized from seed companies, that's a screening process, whereas it has all been winnowed to be cleared of chaff and inert material.
So I'm going to pick up on something that you just said, so you do the seed cleaning on the farm. And I'm curious how you've divided the different roles on your farm to make everything work with these different operations that are going on, running a vegetable operation, cleaning seed, getting stuff to market, getting harvested on time, all those things. How do you divide roles on your farm?
Naturally. the natural way.
That is to say, we each follow our strengths.
Exactly.
I have the most experience with seed cleaning, so I do all of the seed cleaning. I would say that I am the point person on seed and seed stuff. I look for seed contracts. We talk about seed contracts together and decide what we're doing together, but I'm the contact person for getting seed contracts. I'm also the person who decides how much to propagate, how much space we're going to be using for seed, the planning elements of that, and then all of the cleaning. But also I'm integral to the market garden. So it's not to say that I don't do the market garden stuff year round also. I also harvest for market and all of those things. And Joelene, even though I would say that she is the market garden lead,
but only more in the field,
because I'm the market person. Yeah. So I feel like it follows our strengths. I'm a more social person, and that's part of why I do markets, but Joelene does the planning and the market garden, like telling us exactly what we need to be doing on any given day for the farm and stuff like that.
Because my background and my specialty is I was a production manager on a 60-acre organic farm for 27 years. So it's just kind of what I do is the planning of the farm, and I really like being a part of everything now, like being a part of transplanting and harvest and selling. And it's really nice just to go through be part of all the steps, and just instead of just being like a manager of production.
Mm-hmm. In the period of like September, where everything is due, is that something where you're able to all be working on seed and all be working on vegetables? Like, is that something where you kind of work as a group from one task to another? Or is this where maybe people take on specific roles to make sure the job gets done in the time that's allotted?
I think the answer is yes. And we do a lot of stuff together. And then, so I'm the only one who does the seed cleaning. So we will do the harvest of the seed crop and sort of the threshing of the seed crop, and then get it to a place where I can deal with it separately, but also sort of blocking our day maybe is the more appropriate way of saying it, because we'll do market garden stuff all morning while it's hot, and we know we have to get our harvest in before it gets hot. And then in sort of the afternoon, I'll be cleaning seed in a covered place.
And we have people come helps too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had a lot of support actually from market people who are like, oh wow, you grow seed, I'd love to like know. And I'm like, great, why don't you come down in September? Like, yeah, so we've had a lot of support from people who are interested in seed, and so they'll come out for a day and thresh stuff for us, or thresh stuff with us, I should say, or harvest with us. Yeah, but I think blocking the time is a big element of it. I'm the one who does all of the seed cleaning, but
so the way that you sell seeds is through seed contracts. So that's getting contracts from a seed company, and then you get a certain amount that you have to fulfill, and you grow it out, and then you send it back to them. So how do you get seed contracts for your farm?
Yeah, that was an interesting element of us starting our seed business, because
you got to get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Once you open that door, you got to be careful.
Yeah. So as you said, contract seed growing works in that you're working with a seed company. They tell you, or they ask you if you're interested in growing with them for a year. Once you're in. So once you're in, at sort of the end of the year, beginning of the year, we'll have a conversation with the seed company where they say like, okay, these are the list of crops that we're still trying to place. Do any of these work for you? These are the amounts of seed that we're looking for the different crop types. And so right then you lock in on a price as well as the amount that you're trying to produce for the year. And then basically you follow up with them during the rest of the year, and filling them in on sort of like, for example, last year we had a massive heat event that really impacted seed production. And so I was talking to them as that was happening. But then at the end of the year, did I meet my contract? And then I get paid at the end of it. And that's kind of how a seed contract grows. And that was appealing for us to get into the seed business, because we were not super interested in having a seed business in which we grew the seed and packaged the seed and marketed the seed and then found places to sell the seed. We wanted to have something that we knew what we were going to grow, we knew how much space we would need, and we knew how much we would be making for it. That was what would fit with our market gardening business. It
didn't take as much time. Mm-hmm. But I think we should start too about like how we actually got started and how we actually got the first seed contracts. And I think that happened because we contacted seed companies that we already knew people in, because we'd been in the business. Because I ordered all the seed for the farm and I had seed contacts, and Adrianna had worked for a seed business. And so she had people that she was in contact with. So we contacted them, and we had a certain amount of credibility because they knew us and they knew what we had done before, even if it was working for other companies. And then that gave us some credibility, and they were like, okay, well, let's just trial you will just trial these 2 seed crops for us, and we'll see how you do on that. If you do well, then we'll just increase maybe. So you start out small, and they have to do, quality checks on your seed, and they do disease checks on your seed that you turn in. And the reason they do that is because it does take a lot of infrastructure to grow seed. You need places to dry the seed. You need to keep the seed safe from rodents eating it. All sorts of things can happen to that seed after you harvest it. It could go dormant because you left it in the sun too long, and that creates a dormancy, which is not easily broken. So they might not want to ship that seed out to people. And they don't, what I didn't realize is they don't really mentor you that much about how to do this stuff. So you're like, oh yeah, grow this onion seed, and good luck, kind of. Like, you have to figure out how to grow it, the spacing, the timing on when to harvest, and how to dry it, how to clean it, and everything. Pretty much you have to figure out everything about that. And I mean, luckily we just had a lot of experience with seed. I can see that starting out as somebody new would be difficult. Adrianna has worked as a mentor towards people who want to grow seed, because there's a lot of different parts to it. And so I think once you're in with a seed company, I feel like, and they see that you do quality seed, then they're just like, oh, grow this and grow this. And that's when you have a lot more decisions to make about what you want to grow.
So you have to pay your dues, kind of, to build that relationship with the seed company before you're on the inside.
Yes, because I mean, we're all growing open pollinated seed. So open pollinated seed is, they could get crossing if you're not careful. Your neighbor could be growing zucchini and it crosses with your delicata or something like that. The seed companies just want to make sure that you're somebody who's really paying attention to all the aspects and different issues that may happen.
Yeah, the probationary period, I think, is really important as a measure of safety for the seed company. But I think it's also really important for us as growers. We did it the first year, and they were smaller seed contracts, but they really allowed us to see, like, okay, this is what a summer seed crop, this is how we fit it into our workflow. Does that work? This is how, we get all of our seed turned in on time. And it really allowed us to figure out if we could do them simultaneously based on the systems that we had in place. So I think that was really important.
I mean, for example, our cucumber crop that we took on. So there's your dry seed, like Adrianna should correct me if I say anything wrong here, but there's your dry seed, like, your mustard seed or your kale seed, your lettuce seed is all dry seed. And then you have your wet seed, which is like cucumbers seed that's, inside this wet fruit, and like tomato seed is wet. And that's completely different, like, cleaning process.
Last year, we grew a 1/4 acre of cucumbers for seed production specifically. And we did 125 pounds of cucumber seed production.
But we had like how many tons of cucumbers?
Yeah, so the 1/4 acre of cucumbers was, I don't know, mountains and mountains of cucumbers that we had to, cut in half and scoop the seeds out of. And we're 2 people.
It's really easy to say you're going to do a contract, but then, like, the reality, the cucumber mountain reality is really intense.
It was really intense last year. Yeah, so we realized what our limit is on growing cucumber seed.
How close to a 1/4 acre is that limit?
I think a quarter acre is the limit, or for us it was.
Yeah.
And what was extra challenging about that is, we grew a quarter acre, and based on the 2 years before of growing cucumber seed that we had experience with, we thought that we would overproduce on our contract. And because of the heat dome that happened last summer, we actually didn't meet our contract. And so it was still a giant mountain of cucumbers, but with the weather as it was and the way that the cucumbers sort of matured during that, or rather, they matured early, but the seed wasn't fully
There's
ripe.
a lot of empty seed.
A lot of empty seed. That's our dog asking for breakfast. It turned actually into, I wouldn't say a failure, but a challenge. But yeah, I would definitely say a quarter acre is the limit to what we can do for a cucumber as, 2 people that do it all by hand. And that goes back into the conversation of infrastructure, right? Like, do we want to have infrastructure for wet seeded crops? Do we want to have machines that are doing that for us? And what does that cost? And what is our interest level in doing more wet seeded crops? And is that infrastructure solely for cucumbers? And then we would need to expand our cucumber seed production or not. It's the sort of decision tree of just like how far into it do you get? But cucumber was our first seed contract that we got, and we feel really committed to Johnny's, who gave us our first seed contract. And so we're still doing the cucumber. We're still doing it by hand.
I'd like to ask, technically, how you did it. So, were you so I'm going to ask a couple questions. So, were you able to, were you just leaving all the cucumbers in the field to process at once, or were you bringing some in to process elsewhere? That's a lot of cucumbers to have to move multiple times.
Yeah. So I want to say a big thanks to our landlord, because we had a giant pile of cucumbers at his place for 6 weeks.
Yeah. And these aren't just cucumbers like you see at the store. These are to get ripe seed, you have to wait until those cucumbers are pretty advanced in their life. Is that right?
So basically the way that it works. Yeah. So we start all of the plants in our propagation space. We transplant them out the way that you would for any market garden. We have them on drip, and then we let them all mature until they're beyond what you would pick.
And the plants are dying.
And the plants are dying back. Yeah.
One of the things, have to do anything really.
You're supposed to pick the king fruit, which is the first fruit off of it. It's supposed to increase production of secondary fruits. So that is one element that you have to do sort of in the growing process. But beyond that, we fertigated it and just watered it for those 5 months. And then in October, we harvested this whole entire quarter acre of cucumbers, which turned into a mountain, into a really big mountain.
2 mountains. We did it twice.
We did it in
2 stages.
Yeah. So we harvested 1/8 of an acre at a time. It was Joelene, myself, and 2 other people who helped us sort of just go through and pick it up and make this really big growing pile. And then we came back a couple days later and did the other 1/8 of the acre and then put it back in the pile. And that's when it was great to be a market gardener, because all those people who had been telling me that they wanted to support us in our seed production came out.
And we cut them in half and scoop the insides really, how would you say, just wet and kind of composted sort of. And then we just scrape the seed into buckets.
And then you ferment the seed for 48 to 72 hours. The first year that we did it, we had read the book and I had talked to my mentors and stuff. And they kept telling me this thing of just it will ferment and then it will be done in 24 to 72 hours. And I was like, how will I know? How will I know? How will I know? And they were like, you'll know. And I was just so nervous. I was like, I don't know if I will know. I don't know how I will know. I don't know what it will look like. I haven't done it. And I'm on the line for a small seed contract, but a contract that I want to fulfill nonetheless, because I would like to have more seed contracts with Johnny's in the future. And so you ferment it and then they stop fermenting. They're like bubbling and active and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they settle down. And then you do this water winnowing process, which is you add water to it and the dense full seed sinks to the bottom and the empty seed and casings float to the top. You let that flow out of your bucket, and then the stuff that settles at the bottom, you have to make sure that you wash it really, really well.
And then you dry it.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the whole process of the cucumbers.
Is there any, so my last question on this, is there any specific way that you dry the cucumber seed?
So we have hot tables in our greenhouse, and
which is like just a hot water. It's tubing below the surface that is run by a small pump and a hot water heater. So the hot water heater and the pump are just pumping water through these tubes. And we just turn that table on and put the seed on there. And fans, lots of fans.
Mm-hmm.
Do you stir it regularly through the day or through a couple days?
It dries overnight usually, or in like about 12 hours, right?
But during the fermenting process, you do need to stir it at like twice a day. We were doing it once in the morning and then
fermenting?
Yeah, during the fermenting process, you do stir it. But during the drying process, it usually takes just one overnight on our hot tables to dry. We have the hot tables not for seed production. We have them they're the hot tables that we germinate our tomatoes and our peppers, and it's our propagation space. But that's an investment that we made in our propagation space that also helps us with drying our seed.
You do stir the seed on as it's on the table a little bit. And we also have to cover it to make sure that mice don't get in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another element. Protecting all of the seed from rodents is, you think like, oh yeah, you don't want them to eat it. But if they eat it and there's mouse droppings in it, mouse droppings are dense. It's very hard to separate them from good seed if you get it in there. So, mouse droppings can be any size. So, the screening and winnowing process doesn't exactly separate out mouse droppings. So like keeping it out from rodents is a really important element, because then it's just inert material that is in there.
What do you use to cover the seed crop to keep rodents out?
Yeah, we use screens and hardware cloth. That's what we do when we're drying it on the hot tables.
Window screen type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, window screening. I mean, that's with like a wet crop that we're drying, but with things like brassicas or lettuce, it's really important to process and deal with it and put it in a bin before it's sitting out and mice,
the mice people
are having access to it. Basically, it's just getting it into a safe, temperature stable location. You want to get it under cover and you want to have it be totally protected. So threshing it and getting it into a size that you can actually just put it in a bin and put it away is like a very important element, because the longer that you leave it out, the more that you're going to just be drawing rodents in.
Thank you for taking me through that cucumber seed journey, and then the bonus mouse journey. I really appreciate that, and I think all our listeners are going to really like that too. I'd like to pivot into a last few questions to wrap up the conversation. So one question I'm going to ask is, how much seed that you produce do you use on your own farm?
So contractually, I will say we're supposed to turn in all of our seed, but also because I'm trying to meet a contract, I'm turning in I would say 95% of the seed that's like good and viable, I'm turning that into my contract. So the amount that we have left is usually sort of like the lower quality stuff. I think also it's changing. We're also talking more this year about growing more seed for our farm of varieties that have become unavailable. So I would say for meeting our contracts, we'll hold on to some amount of the seed. It's lower quality seed and we'll grow it out until we don't have any more. But that's not the high quality seed that I want to actually be producing food on. So,
but we do. I mean, we had this really cool black futsu seed that we grew, and we grew that again.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, the diversity of things that we grow is so much more than the seed that we grow. Yeah. You know, for winter squash, we did, for the black futsu example, we grew black futsu seed and
as a seed crop.
But because it would compete with our other winter squash, we only had one isolation, but we grow about 10 to 12 other types of winter squash. So even though I had black futsu squash for the next 2 years based on my seed contract and what I had left over, I grow 12 other kinds of winter squash. So 1 out of 12 is not that high of a percentage of the diversity of winter squash that I grow.
It would be hard to grow all the variety that we have.
Yeah. And I think that still drives us towards seed production. You know, we're dependent on seed companies. So we want to grow for seed companies. We want to grow organically for seed companies so that other farmers also have access to these varieties that we love, that we're dependent on, that we know what their production capacity is like, that we know how to integrate them into our systems, that are the basis of our livelihood. And so that comes back to sort of the bigger mission of why we grow seed on contract.
Now, what would you tell your younger seed saving selves?
Learn as much as you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot to know.
Mm-hmm. I think I would say to myself, be patient. Be patient and take your wins where you have them. You know, I was talking earlier, I took our not meeting our seed contract last year as a failure, and it really wasn't. It was a really successful year for us, and we produced really high quality seed that now a lot of other people get to grow. Being patient with yourself and taking your wins where you have them, I think, is good advice for any grower.
Seed or otherwise.
Seed or otherwise, yeah. And I think the thing of being patient is about being observant. I think a lot of times it feels like you, as a grower, I don't feel like I have enough time. And so I'm trying to rush through something. And really, the more time that I take to be observant, the more successful and productive I can be, actually. So being patient enough to follow the process through, to observe and think about it, makes me a better grower every time.
And what would you say to market growers, whether they're growing, vegetables, herbs, flowers, anything they're growing, to inspire them to start saving seed, either for their own farm or for sale?
I would say it's a gift. It is a gift to see plants through their entire life cycle.
And it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to follow a plant through its whole life cycle and collect that seed and say, maybe your lettuce is crossed and you have the seed and you plant it out again and you think you're going to get like a red lettuce, but you get like this red green lettuce or something. You can kind of create your own crosses too with things, and create your own varieties in your own garden. And that's kind of fun.
There's a lot of joy and excitement in integrating seed production, whether it's for yourself and on your farm or on seed contracts or for starting a seed business, like whatever it is, it's new and exciting and a dynamic element of learning.
And that's kind of the old way, is people saved their tomato seed and gave it to their neighbors, or, that's the way they do seed swapping a lot, right? That's kind of old. Seed wasn't as available.
Well, thank you so much, Adrianna and Joelene, for having this conversation with me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for making the time. I really appreciate that you're doing this. I mean, I think I love that this has the capacity to like reach people and inspire them for seed saving, because it's a really, really beautiful and engaging process that, you know, it's like when people get in touch with eating food from their own gardens, it's kind of like that. It just kind of changes and opens everything else up. Yeah, so it's exciting that we're kind of opening this up to more people.
And that's the first episode of the Seed Growers Podcast. A huge thanks to Adrianna and Joelene for being my first podcast guests ever. They are such a good example of how you can integrate seed production to a bustling market garden. I hope they've inspired you to give it a try. You can follow their farm, Empowered Flowers, on Instagram. A huge thanks to Sophie C. Delton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiecdelton.com. The Seed Growers Podcast is produced in part by No-Till Growers with the help of our sponsors, the Bauda Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and the Organic Seed Alliance. This podcast would not be here if it wasn't for Jackson Roulette and Jesse Frost of No-Till Growers. I'd been thinking about this podcast for a long time when I mentioned it casually to Jackson and Jesse last fall. They took that casual comment and turned it into a reality, so a huge thanks to Jackson and Jesse. And an extra thank you to Jackson for all the behind-the-scenes work he's done in editing and post-production on this episode, and doing all the stuff to get the episode into your ears. You can find more seed-growing resources on my blog at goingtoseed.net. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed-growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheet information. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time, because there's another episode coming out next week. Until then, happy farming! Somebody's ready for this to be over.
Yeah. He's like, also, there's a delivery person here. I don't know if you know that.